Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to writing.ie. That wasn't quite as slick as I had hoped. I was hoping to lose the white screen, but you're very, very warm welcome to writing.ie. Hopefully you'll be watching either on Facebook or on YouTube. My name's Sam Blake, and I am the best-selling author of the Cat Connolly trilogy, you can see behind me, which are 3 police procedurals, and The Dark Room, which is also behind me here. And also keep your eyes on me, a couple of standalones as well. So there's a whole mixture there. I'm a crime writer, obviously, and I have quite a big advantage for a lot of crime writers because I'm married to an ex-police officer. So I have people I can ask when I get stuck. But I know from the inquiries that come into me, particularly through writing.ie, which I run as well, that it's not always that simple. So today we are talking to a whole series of different individuals who are experts in their field. We have got Graham Bartlett, who runs a police advisory service, who is an police commander, Kate Bendelow, who is a crime scene investigator, and also Dr. Emma Donnelly, who is a psychologist. And I hope you're going to have lots of questions for us, because the idea today is that we will get through your questions as much as possible. Now, I have got all sorts of screens down here, so anything could go wrong with the tech, but we will see how we go. I want to introduce, I'm just going to fire out first Graham's, hopefully, there we go. Graham's details of Graham's website and services so that you all have access to that. We'll be running that again at the end as well. So I'm going to pop that out. And then I am going to bring in Graham himself. There we go. Just count him in. Good morning, Mr. Bartlett. How is it in your part of the world?
Thank you for inviting me.
Not delighted to have you. Now, we are going to just bring in Kate, who has an amazing book, which is all about CSI, which I just have to find on my screen here. Give me 1 second. Sorry, it's a bit of there's so many people and things to come in. Here we go, it's coming up now. Right, we'll have a quick look at that, guys. That is the link to Kate's book, which you can get. As you can see, it's a forensic handbook for crime writers. We're going to be talking more about that later. But I just wanted to show you that to start with, and then we're going to bring Kate in. Here she comes. Good morning, Kate. We can see you nice and clearly.
Hi.
Excellent. And I'm going to bring in Dr. Emma Donnelly as well. And our screen will change. There we go. Now we're all sorted. So basically, hi Emma, how are you? I just wanted to introduce these guys and then talk to them a little bit about what it is they do. And then hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions. So Graham, you run an advisory service now for authors. You work with some absolutely major names, Mark Billingham and Peace James and all sorts of people. Actually, we need to bring in your book too. I'll bring that in at the end. But prior to that, you were a very active police officer. So give us just a little overview of what it was that you did and what you do.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I was, in fact, we should have discussed that picture you put up of me a minute ago, because that was horrible. Anyway.
Actually, on the telly, I know, sorry about that.
we need to work these things out. Anyway, yeah, so I used to be a police officer. I was a detective for most of my career. I was 30 years in Sussex Police. So as a detective, I used to investigate murders, kidnaps, rapes, burglaries, just about everything really. And then in the last few years of my service, I was the police commander for Brighton and Hove, which is a city about 45, 50 miles south of London, very cosmopolitan seaside city, incredibly busy, lots of, well, not at the moment, lots of visitors, lots of nightlife, sporting events, protests, that sort of thing. And I used to sum it up that if anything went wrong in Brighton and Hove, it was probably my fault. So that's kind of describes my job, really. But now I'm a police advisor to about 70 authors and TV writers. Yeah, you mentioned some of the names that I work with, but I also work with debut authors and everyone in between, really. And it's just about getting police procedure into crime fiction in a credible way, but a way that supports the drama rather than saps away from it.
Absolutely, and that getting that detail right is really important. I'm just putting in my headphones now, by the way, guys, because I forgot to do it earlier. Give me 1 second. Hopefully it'll all work, because there's a bit of feedback coming through on my. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Good. I can hear you. There's a bit of feedback coming through. So yeah, no. So and that's a remarkable career, I have to say. starting from the ground zero. She should put the picture we should have put up was you in your uniform, I think, going right through the top and running all sorts of different operations, and really having a really wide experience right the way across from, crime scene operation right the way to firearms and all the other bits and pieces that you did. So it's fascinating. But as you say, getting that detail right, but bringing authenticity to the book, it's really, really important. Kate, you're a crime scene officer. You work with Graham, don't you? And in fact, just to say to people, guys, we are going to get through as many of your questions as we can today within our hour. But Kate actually has literally the call of duty and has to go off to work a bit later. So we're going to follow up. And if there's any questions that we don't get to live, don't worry. We are going to go through the comments afterwards and answer those. So we will make sure we get to everybody. So Kate, just tell us a little bit about what it is that you do.
So I've been a serving crime scene investigator with Greater Manchester Police for, this will be my 19th year. So obviously part of the day job is to, day-to-day bread and butter jobs is to attend burglaries, stolen cars, that sort of thing. And then obviously be on hand for any of the big jobs that happen, shootings, robberies, rapes, murders, you name it, we do it basically. And I'm also a writer, as you showed my book cover before, The Real CSI. I'm also really, really pleased that I was signed end of last year with Bloodhound Books for my CSI Maya Barton trilogy. The first book in that series, Definitely Dead, is out on the 24th of May. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah,
really excited.
We're covering that at writing.ie, trust me. We'll make sure we give you a plug there.
Thank you.
I mean, that literally, that authenticity, your job is the type of job, and it's the same would have been with Graham. When you go into work in the morning, you have no idea what's going to happen or where you're going to go.
That's what I love about it. Yeah, it's feast or famine. You can go in and you never know what you're walking into, and you can have some days where, or you can work a shift where there is literally nothing happening, nothing to go to, and other days where we're chasing our tails. It's not unusual in Manchester for us to be running 2-3 murders at a time, so there's always, in that case, there's always something to go to. But like you say, it's just that not knowing what you're going to walk into in every shift.
You have to be
really good.
Have to be very well versed in a lot of different areas. Emma, you are a forensic psychologist, and you've been working a huge amount with the prison service, haven't you? I think over your career, you've done all sorts of things. Give us an overview, because I think your day is one of those days where you don't quite know what's coming either.
Yeah, it's a little different now because I'm no longer in the prison service, so it's a little bit more kind of predictable. But yes, I have worked in prisons over in the UK, in England actually, and in Ireland. And I've worked mainly with violent offenders and with sexual offenders. So that's my kind of my bread and butter, was doing risk assessment for people who have been convicted of violent offences and also of sexual offences. So doing a risk assessment, and then that would guide treatment or appropriate interventions, either with psychology services or through other means, through addiction services, education, that kind of stuff. So in the course of my kind of day-to-day work in the prison service, but also I've worked with young people in secure care, I've worked with people in the community. So I've worked, right across the life spectrum, and right across the kind of community spectrum, like your typical society. So, come across people who have major mental health difficulties, personality disorders, psychopathy, people who would rate highly on the psychopathy checklist. People who have experienced complex traumas, majority of them experience it in childhood, but then ongoing complex trauma throughout their lifespan. People with acquired brain injury, and how that impacts on their day-to-day life. I'm currently working with people who have experienced child sexual abuse. But I've also worked with people who've experienced all sorts of childhood abuse and neglect. And the implications of that across the lifespan, right in the here and now, when people are still children or young people, but also people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s even, who might have experienced chronic abuse or trauma in childhood. So yeah, quite and you don't know what, somebody might come into your clinic room presenting, one kind of presenting complaint will be the reason that they're referred in, but actually you go, in 17 different directions and work with whatever comes in on the day. So highly.
I think, it's fascinating. I think that one of the key things for writers is sort of, certainly from the sort of psychology perspective, is to get the motivation of their characters right.
Yeah.
And obviously Kate's going to know a lot about this, writing fiction too. I think, Graham, you're writing fiction as well now, aren't you, at the moment?
Yes, I am. Yeah. I've got a book with my agent at the moment, so hoping to hear back on that very soon. And started writing the second one with my blind optimism that somebody's going to buy my first one. But
I think that's really valuable for people to grasp, as well as the fact that you guys are all writing fiction and understanding how fiction works and learning how to apply the information is really, really important. Motivation, as I say, is vital in terms of understanding how a character acts and reacts within a situation, and why they do things, and making sure that that's plausible. So that's sort of Emma's end of things. When you're writing, Graham, you've got a huge amount of information. One of the problems that we have, I'm going to ask you guys for what your sort of top 3 mistakes that you see mostly are, but one of the biggest ones I think is information dumps. Do you find that a lot? I mean, and you have 30 years of experience, so how do you avoid, for you in your fiction, how do you avoid information dumps? Tell us what that is too, because anybody who doesn't know.
Really, it's really hard because, as you say, you know, I know how these murders are investigated. I know who does what. I know the number of officers and support staff and such like that are involved. And it's so tempting to write it as is. And this is why I talk about writing credible and authentic crime fiction rather than real crime fiction, because, you know, if you were to write a murder, you know, your cast would be huge, and your readers would get completely sort of bogged down with trying to work out who's who. The bureaucratic procedures would take over. So it's about trying to pick the key characters that you want the reader to fix on. And sometimes you have to kind of amalgamate roles, you know, and it goes against, you know, everything that I ever, you know, I was ever taught, you know, to mix intelligence and investigative roles, for example. You might have to do that for fiction. But also find the drama in the mundane. So, you know, a lot of it is mundane, but there are peaks of drama, and it's focusing on those bits of drama. So, you know, I think that's why, you know, for people like Kate, Emma and I, it's important that we do understand writing, and we do understand what the authors are trying to achieve, and that the story and the characters must always come first, and there's always a way of working the procedure into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so true. Kate, you've got, obviously, when you're writing as well, you've got the crime scene situation, and there's so much detail that goes into that. Do you find that you're having to really pare back a lot too?
Oh yeah, I mean, if I was to detail everything that's involved, it would read mind-numbingly boring. It really would. One thing I realised quite soon into writing the book was it's so much easier to investigate a real-life murder than it is to fictionally create one. Too much knowledge, and I've sort of like Graham said, maybe I've allowed myself a little poetic license and have carved certain things out that you wouldn't do in real life, and which I know goes against what we say we're teaching the real thing, but you have to realistically. And I say a lot of what we do, the job's perceived as very, very glamorous. It's not at all. Working on something long term, like a murder in particular, can be incredibly physically hard work, and it can be very tedious, but obviously you need to recover evidence type, so it is what it is. Yeah, you couldn't write about it.
No, and yeah, in all the minute detail. But I think what's really interesting in terms of crime scene is making sure that you get that procedure right, so that, well, certainly when I write a police procedural, I want you guys as police officers to be able to sit down and read it and say, yeah, that's right, and not be jerked out of the story, because that's the thing that happens when you make a mistake, I think, as an author, is that the reader gets jerked out of the story. And it could be something simple like, you know, that you think, oh, it would be really great, you know, if this chief superintendent took this piece of evidence home and then, you know, left it in the kitchen or put it in the fridge, or, you know, this is very dramatic, but in fact actually is the last thing that is ever going to happen. But you know, as a writer, you get carried away, and you can end up doing all sorts of things like that. So I think that's why your services are so important in terms of advising writers, to make sure that you absolutely get that right. And guys, do send in your questions. I can see a really good one here for Emma to start off with, so we'll go to that now in 1 second. Just, can we run through the top 3 mistakes? You've had a chance to think about that, because that's very important for people to take on board. Graham first.
Okay, so my top 3 are The first one is firearms operations in England, Wales, and Scotland, where officers aren't armed. They are, for absolutely understandable reasons, writers and TV makers write them with far too much drama. Everyone's got a gun. There's no discipline around it, and actually, the default tactic in England and Wales, particularly on a firearms operation, is to stop everything, put your foot on the ball, and try and bore the person out of the house that you're trying to get them out of. I mean, it's a bit more complicated than that, obviously. So the way firearms operations are commanded and carried out is something that I always kind of delve straight into if I see one and try and rewrite those. And in fact, I'm going to be running a workshop soon on that if people are interested on that. The second one is the over-optimistic or over-productive technical facilities that the police have. So or their investigative facilities. So downloading a 2 terabyte computer onto a USB stick, typing in one name, and then you get all of their life history rolling off through one database, and being able to solve a murder on one CCTV camera and one set of footage, rather than the hundreds of cameras and footage that have to be kind of patchwork together. So that's the one. So we've got firearms and technical, and the other one is around the culture and language of police officers. And how police officers talk to one another, how they talk to members of the public, how they address one another. It's a workplace in the same way as probably most people on this event have a workplace. So we don't go around bellowing at each other, threatening each other, calling each other by surnames. We don't threaten people with demotion, promotion, the sack, and that sort of thing. Take the mickey out of one another. We play tricks on one another, and we work together. And sometimes it can be a bit dull because there isn't that excitement. But it's this kind of militaristic, kind of top-down sort of workplace that people create that really needs some work. When I see that, and it's something obviously that I can help on. So they're my 3: firearms, technical, and language and culture.
Culture, yeah, absolutely, good ones. And Kate, for you, what do you see? What horrendous messes do we make of crime scenes when you read them?
My top 3, I think the one that really gets my goat the most is when you read or watch a scene where police officers just trample the crime scene, and totally. They walk in, snap on a pair of gloves, and that's it, and then poke things around with a pen, and that really does get my goat. We wear those stupid white scene suits for a reason, and basically, if you've not got one of them on, you're not coming in my crime scene. I don't care who you are. So yeah, that's my biggest bugbear. Probably moving on from that, my second is we're crime scene investigators. We investigate the crime scene. So if you've got a protagonist who's a police officer, don't have them go in swabbing blood. Don't have them go in recovering items and exhibits. That's basically my job. We will do that. There's so many. Am I only allowed 3?
No, you can go as many as you like. We don't want many of these guys making any mistakes. Oh, she's frozen. Hang on, just
a little bit, and I don't know if Graham's noticed this as well. Is Americanisms. Yeah. So obviously CSI itself is an Americanism. I personally still also refer to the term SOCO, which is scene of crime officer. Either or are still bandied around police forces. But if you are writing British crime fiction, then make sure it's British. So you've got a mortuary, not a morgue. You will have a post-mortem, not an autopsy, and it's murder. It is not homicide. That drives me insane.
Yeah. No.
I just come in on Kate's point there about SOCOs and CSIs, because some forces do call their SOCOs CSIs, but I don't know of a detective that would refer to that in conversation. They wouldn't say we'll get the CSIs in. That even if their force calls them CSIs, detectives will generally say we'll get the SOCOs down there. Is that okay? So
it is, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Because it's an older term. Because obviously I say this is my 19th year, so I was brought up with SOCO, so I refer to myself as SOCO. It gets passed down, so tutor constables as well who've been in the job for years will training new police officers as SOCO. So
we lost her.
Coming in and out.
Forensics, which grates me a little bit as well, because obviously that's a massive field, and then you're talking about so many other experts. So
yeah, it's fascinating.
I could rant all day about my
so go on, queuing forensics. I'm just going to say I'm reading this book at the moment, Murder Under the Microscope, which is what happens when all the bits and pieces that you've collected go back to the lab. And this is by a guy called Jim Fraser, who is the scientific end. It's all, there's a lot in there about blood splatter, fibre evidence, and DNA. So well worth looking at after they've read your book, Kate. So go on. Anyway, number 3. Have we got to number 3? What's your? I think we've got a bit of a delay on the line, have we? There we go. Kate, do you want to go out and come back in again? Because we're getting a bit of a delay on your, if you can hear me, on your line there. And what we'll do is we'll switch to Emma and ask Emma for your top 3, because I've got some burning questions coming in here too. So,
like Kate, I couldn't narrow it down to just 3, so I've like pages in front of me of various different
okay,
and I'm like swamped in paperwork. But I'll try and kind of keep to the 3 biggest ones. First of all, not all violent offenders are mentally ill, and not all people who are mentally ill will commit violent offences. It's it's so common that in TV, in film, in books, that somebody who's done such a heinous crime must be crazy, must be mentally ill. That's not the case. And actually, people with mental illness are far more likely to be victims of violent offences than perpetrators of. There is a slight exception in that people with paranoid delusions are more likely to commit a violent offence. If you think about it, if you think that your mother is the devil, or that the police officers who are coming to take you are aliens trying to abduct you, of course you're going to lash out. Anybody in the right mind would lash out. Somebody with paranoid delusion thinks they're in the right mind and are going to lash out to keep themselves safe. Also, people with severe substance misuse, especially in the throes of maybe a drug-induced psychotic episode, are more likely to act out. Other than that, people with mental illness are far more likely to be a victim of rather than a perpetrator of crime.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and it's such an easy to go to thing in writing, whether you're writing novels or you're writing for TV or for film. Staying with the mental illness part of it, people with a personality disorder, a personality disorder is not a mental illness. It cannot be treated by medication. It is generally, I spoke earlier about people with complex trauma coming in. Complex trauma will often develop into personality disorders. And if you think personality disorder is a disorder in how people relate to each other, relate to other people. So just because somebody has a personality disorder does not mean that they have a mental illness. And also psychopathy is not a mental illness. It's a personality disorder to the nth degree. So people with personality disorders and psychopathy can be incredibly lucid all of the time. People with active mental illness might have moments of dipping in and out of lucidity. So I feel like I'm getting a little bit too complicated here, but just on a very simple level, not all
big subject.
Yeah, I could talk for hours.
2 minutes. We will.
Yeah. Okay, so moving swiftly on, a forensic psychologist, somebody who is a forensic psychologist is not just a profiler. Profiling is not forensic psychology. That's hugely misrepresented in common pulp fiction. Profiling would be a very, very tiny part, and actually the majority of people who would have trained as a forensic psychologist will not do profiling ever in their career. Forensic psychologists will more often work in prisons, doing assessment of treatment, much like myself. They will do, mental health and trauma work, interventions with people. They might work organizationally. So they'll work with staff support, critical incident debriefing, and they might carry out investigations. They'll work in the courts providing expert testimony or advice to lawyers. Certainly in the States, it's far more common, where the lawyers might recruit forensic psychologists to help with jury decision making, and picking the jurors. Obviously, we don't do that here. They might work with police in terms of investigations. That tiny little fraction of that might be in developing profiles. They work in staff support, critical incident debriefing, assessments, that kind of stuff. And they'll also, be looking at working with people who are maybe undercover agents. So is the person kind of getting too far into their cover? Are they mentally stable enough to provide or to work as an undercover agent? And also for recruitment. So kind of like the nuts and bolts of policing, but not the getting down and looking, going, the person who did this is this, much more kind of mundane. And then in private practice, they might do pre-sentencing risk assessments and pre-sentencing interventions with people. So sometimes people will be relieved that they're caught and they'll go and seek out treatment. They were waiting to be caught in order to get treatment. Sometimes they might do it because they want to get a lesser sentence. So, the motivations of, but a private forensic psychologist will operate in kind of those.
I think that's really interesting for anybody who is thinking of putting a forensic psychologist in as their protagonist, that there is a massive spectrum of things that you could cover there.
Huge. Yeah.
Really, it's really interesting. Kate, can you hear us? Are you okay? Are you back in the frame here?
Yeah, you went really glitchy. I sort of lost you.
I thought, we lost you for a moment then, but I think you've come back now. So.
I'm back in the room. Did you ask me anything I didn't hear?
We missed. We're just obviously we're just with Emma on the forensics now, but I just wanted to come back to you for your third point. Sorry to cut you off there, Emma. We'll get back to you as well, because I saw Kate was starting to move normally. So if you could just give us your third point, and then we're going to go to the questions. Your third mistake people make.
My third point.
We missed that.
I think it will be fingerprints, misuse of fingerprints. So I read a book which was absolutely fantastic a couple of years ago, and the woman had returned to a flat and she knew somebody had been in. She just knew somebody had been in there, but there was nothing seemingly disturbed. And then she spotted a fingerprint on the curtain. Obviously, you don't get fingerprints off fabric, so that's probably my third biggest bugbear is misplacement of fingerprints. You don't get them on small surface items, so door handles, light switches, keys. If you're going to use fingerprints in your writing, please research where they would be accurately deposited. End of rant.
That's gold dust. I think there's fantastic stuff here coming from all of you. I'm going to just go over to the questions, and I'm conscious of the fact Graham's sitting there, he's probably reading through the questions. I hope you're having a look there now, Graham, while I'm talking to the other guys. Emma, the first one's for you. I'm writing, this is Dan saying, I'm writing a crime novel where the killer is also a psychologist. Can we ask Dr. Emma, what skills and training would a psychologist have to enable him or her to commit murder and get away with it?
Can I use my very, very typical psychology answer?
Absolutely.
It depends. Anything in psychology can be answered with it depends. So first of all, can I just point out that not all psychologists become murderers? I just want to, because it seems to be quite a common theme that Graham, okay, we might all want to, but no, generally not all psychologists become murderers. We might have violent fantasies and be more in touch with them. What skills and trainings might a psychologist have to enable them to commit murder and get away with it? I think, a huge amount of information available at their fingertips, in the nature of, and it depends on what type of psychologists are they? Are they, have they training in forensic psychology? Did they do that in order to gather tips on how to get away with murder? Or are they an educational psychologist where their primary kind of day-to-day tasks is doing cognitive assessments and adaptive functioning assessments on littlies? They're not going to have a huge amount of information. So it really does depend on their training. But, I suppose kind of understanding motivations, as Vanessa, you were talking about earlier on, motivation is a huge important thing to get right. So understanding the motivations of, why are they looking to commit murder? And that will indicate how they are likely to get away with it or not, what steps they might need to cover up. They might have a better understanding of investigative techniques and, what happens in, when a body is found, how to kind of throw the investigators off. So Kate and Graham will be coming in and looking at a body posed in a certain way. Well, somebody who's kind of got my level of training might be able to pose it in a way that points attention away from me and onto somebody else.
Very interesting case, because one of the things we're going to talk to you about is that whole dumping thing and what you can interpret from a scene of the way a body has been disposed of. So I think that's perhaps the gold in that answer, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, in terms of skills and training, one of the key traits a psychologist needs is to, and I hope I'm doing a good enough job of demonstrating this, is an ability to communicate and to be persuasive in your argument. So if you're making an argument for something, you have research, you back it up with research. It's not just common sense. And a lot of times people think psychology is common sense. It's not. You know, it is based in research. So if you see stats being kind of bandied about, there is good research to back that up. So if I want to convince you that I didn't kill somebody, you know, I'm likely to be able to provide a persuasive argument as to why I didn't and who else might have done it. So that kind of negotiation, persuasiveness, ability to communicate might help them to get away with murder, as well as the kind of intricate know-how.
Oh, fascinating. I think it's fascinating. Stephen Bowman's asked a question here, which I was going to go throw at Graham, but I can now see it's actually in 3 parts. So I'm going to throw the top level bit to you, Graham, and then Stephen, what we'll do is come back and answer some of those in more detail. It's an Irish-based question, but the law between the UK and Ireland is very similar. Just to say to guys out there who are writing perhaps an Irish procedural, where things start to differ really is in the interview technique and interview process, I think, and then there would be a certain amount in the courts that would be a bit different. So do make sure, I know this personally, because when I first started writing, I wrote an absolutely fantastic scene about an interview based completely on the bill, and went to discuss it with my husband and told that it was all wrong and had to completely rewrite it. So do make sure that you do check the processes. But Graham, just to say, it is set in Ireland. Person A is intoxicated on a class A substance. Witnesses person B drowning. Person A does not jump in to save person B or call the emergency services, and person B dies. So the first question is person A accountable? And if so, what would they be charged with? In the UK, what would happen there?
Okay, well, I'm going to assume that the law is similar, but I know Marie's on the call as well, so maybe she might be able. She
might have some. Yeah, she might be able to help us out with that question.
So in England and Wales, potentially, but there's a lot of hurdles to go. Person A could be charged with gross negligence manslaughter, but they would have to have a. So first of all, they'd have to have a duty of care to that person, and that duty of care can be a moral duty of care. So it could be that you see somebody bleeding out on the street, then unless you've got a very good reason, then you need to go and do something about that, and that they didn't sort of discharge that duty of care. Now there's lots of complications in this particular scenario. So the fact they're intoxicated with a Class A substance. Obviously, that's a different issue in terms of their criminality around that. But has that influenced, how they perceive their duty of care? Because they have to
impaired their judgment.
Exactly. Yeah. And the other side is the person drowning. In terms of not jumping in, the person A could argue that they can't swim, or it wasn't safe, or they were just scared or whatever. Calling the emergency services might be something that make them liable for manslaughter charge, but it'd be quite a huge legal hurdle, but it not an insurmountable one in certain circumstances. So could be accountable. It's a bit like Emma's answer. It depends. It depends. And they would be charged with manslaughter if they were accountable.
Yeah, very interesting scenario. That's a really cool one. So yeah, and we'll get Marie is on the call too, who is one of Graham's Garda advisors over in Ireland here. So she might be able to jump in and give you some advice on that. But we'll certainly look back. I can see that was in a couple of different parts. William Shaw is also on the call here, and he is an incredible author. And he's just saying he can vouch for Graham's advice on firearms. Now this is really interesting. He persuaded me to back down from a gun siege in a book I wrote called Salt Lane. Give him a knife, said Graham. And instantly the scene became twice as dramatic. So that is the type of insight and experience that these guys can bring to your books. So I highly recommend chatting to them. And we actually have a special offer for you, which we are going to be speaking about later in the call. Somebody else was asking if it was recorded. And yes, it is. You can watch this back as many times as you need to. So now we have a question, I think, for Kate. I am going to bring you in here, Kate. I have a crime happening in a full restaurant. How do I move the people out while getting contacts and not overlook potential witnesses or suspects? So the crime has happened in a restaurant, full restaurant. what would the procedure be then when the guards, so the police are called, whoever? Kate.
I think this is Graham can probably help out with this one as well, more than me, because obviously I attend when it's already been secured. But the main thing is just keeping a detail of everybody who's in the scene, making sure you've got their names and addresses, contact numbers, and not letting anybody go until you've got that detail. Depending as well on what happens, obviously they'd need to be interviewed as well quite soon, wouldn't they, Graham, for witness evidence if they've seen what's happened?
That's right. So what you do in a practical sense is that you would move them all out from the restaurant on a kind of, well, going the other way, we'd call it a common approach path, but you'd have them coming out in one secure route. So if the murder's happened in the restaurant itself, you might move them out through the kitchen, because that's not likely to be part of the crime, part of the active crime scene.
Yeah.
Take them to another venue, another, next door, and the restaurant next door or somewhere. So you take them somewhere, you keep them under sort of control there. You then have to kind of basically, as Kate says, go through each of them, find out what they saw, and you're kind of triaging at this point. Are they likely to be witnesses, or did they see nothing at all? Might they be suspects? So you're triaging them. You're also trying to identify whether or not they might have any forensic material on them, so they might have blood on them, or saliva or something like that might help prove the case. You might need to start seizing clothing, but you're very much trying to control them, and obviously getting their detailed names and addresses and all of that as well. Control them as kind of potential witnesses and potential crime scenes. Now that sounds a lot easier than it actually is, because restaurants and pubs particularly, and you can imagine this happens practically, well, not at the moment, but every weekend somewhere that somebody's murdered in a pub. Managing huge numbers of drunk people that don't want to be managed, they don't want to talk to the police, they probably hate the police anyway, is a really, really tricky situation.
Yeah.
So and you will probably lose people in that. So kind of you're relying on CCTV, you're relying on any kind of ID checks that have been done as people going into pubs or clubs, credit card sales, that sort of thing, to try and identify who was there and try and reconstruct who was in the pub at the time. But
absolutely.
Can I jump in on that point as well, just to say that eyewitness testimony is one of the biggest factors in wrongful convictions. So just because somebody witnessed something or was in a place where something happened doesn't mean that they saw it and they recalled it accurately.
This is so important. Thank you, Emma. Go on.
People think that memory operates like a video recording, like you see something, you record it, and then you can access it perfectly. Memory is very, very infallible. Just a couple of things that have struck me while I was listening to Graham there. If somebody sees somebody getting murdered, right? And they see somebody coming into a restaurant and they've got a gun, right? They're not really going to take a good look at the person's face, because they're more likely to look at the gun. It's called the weapon focus effect. So that's going to skew their ability to accurately recall what the perp was wearing, what they looked like, how tall they were, all those kind of things. And also when you're gathering, all you're in your novel, you're scuttling all of these people out of the scene of the crime into a safe and contained area. Are you keeping them together? Are they talking about the crime? Because how you talk about the crime is going to influence my memory on it. And also the language that is being used. Elizabeth Loftus is a fantastic psychologist who researches memory, and did a study on people who, saw on a videotape a car crash, right? Now it was all staged, it was all set up. But how the investigators asked them about what they saw influenced their memory recall, right? Yeah. So if they saw the collision, they remember one thing. If they saw it was an awful crash, it was an horrific crash, that's going to impact on people's memory. So how people witness it, how they store the memory, and then how they retrieve it and how they make sense of it. And we're all looking at this through our various different experiences. So being mindful that eyewitness testimony is not, it's not like Kate's DNA.
Totally, yeah. I'm laughing quietly here because my husband's always giving out about taking witness statements, and you could take a witness statement from a car crash and the cars will be different colours. I mean,
Absolutely.
people won't even be able to remember what colour the car is.
Yeah.
So,
Or it's
you know,
driven by a man when it was actually a woman, or
indeed,
absolutely.
yeah. So I think that's really useful for everybody there. It's fantastic stuff.
It's just worth saying that's the reason why witnesses are surprised when they're called to give evidence. They think, well, I've given my evidence.
Said it. Yeah.
There. But
Yeah.
as Emma says, their evidence might differ, probably does differ from somebody else's. It's those chinks that the defence counsel, the defence barristers will exploit to try and introduce doubt in the jury's mind. So that exactly what Emma was saying, it gets capitalised for the benefit of the defence.
Indeed, it's really interesting, and that's why. Sorry, why Emma's go on.
Yeah, if I was called to, say, as a, it doesn't really happen a huge amount, certainly in this country, but say as a forensic psychologist, I was called by the investigating officer to the scene of a crime, and they were talking about eyewitness testimony. I would be saying, make sure that you interview everybody independently, that you keep people separate, that you're getting a good account of what they saw, and that you're able then to, like, the police investigating it is not going to go, oh, well, let's take that person's eyewitness. It's a combination of everything, and then you're weeding it out. And the more information you get, the more you can cross-reference that information and come up with an accurate kind of picture of it. But also being mindful that there's probably going to be mistakes in there that the defence will pick out.
It's fascinating, and I think that's when Kate's end of things becomes very, very important, because obviously you're working towards a trial at all stages during this process. You're thinking about a potential trial, and so the scientific end of things, when you're getting in there and looking at, say, you mentioned the word common path there, Graham. This is to do with the way the perpetrator went into the situation, and Kate, that's something you would secure quite early on, isn't it? So when you're doing the science end of things, just walk us through in that instance what would happen, because it's an interesting one.
Yeah, the main thing, like you say, I just need to add on to that as well. It's not about just removing people from the crime scene. It's also about removing pets, because obviously, particularly dogs and cats, it is blood. They will lick the blood up, which it does happen. It's happened in real life. It will continue to happen. So yeah, once the scene is sort of located, it's preserved. If there's a body in the scene, it's always a case that a paramedic will be called to confirm that life is extinct. It could be that the body's here and the head's here. A paramedic will still need to call and say life extinct. It might be on an obvious situation like that, that they will look through the window rather than trample the crime scene. Cordons obviously are used to keep the press and public away. If you've got an indoor scene, so your restaurant, then obviously the exterior of the building is your own natural cordon, but you would use tape outside as well to allow us to come in with our equipment. Scene tents are something that we also use. So if you've got a scenario where you've got a body outside, scene tents are used. I think certainly over the last few years, with the popularity of mobile phones, any sort of death outdoors that we have now is horrific, because the public always want to film it. They have no disregard for the fact that the family might see this online at some point. And journalists as well will have try similar tricks. We've had some journalists as well who've tried to use drones to record a crime scene. So that's something that we need to be aware of more and more if we're working on an outdoor scene. So yeah, parts of preservation are going to be cordons, tents. We also use stepping plates, because any evidence is going to be mainly on the floor. So stepping plates are put down so we can step across the crime scene without disrupting any blood pattern that might be on the floor, any latent footwear marks, that sort of thing. And typically, I think most people are familiar with the yellow numbered markers as well. We use them to plot where different evidence types are within a scene. They're useful twofold, because obviously those big yellow markers are really, really obvious. When you're scene suited up with either a hood up or a hairnet and a mask on, slipping and sliding on stepping plates, you almost feel like quite restricted in your viewing. If there's two of you working in there, a room can quickly feel congested. So the markers are useful to identify and to say, look, there's something fragile here. So if you're going to fall off your stepping plate, don't stand on that. Yeah. It's also useful as well, because when we finish examining the crime scene, a plan drawer will come in and they will do basically the does what it says on the tin. They make a plan draw of the crime scene, and they will plot and locate where all different evidence types are, so it can be visualized later in court. The digital images like that, if it's a particular horrendous murder scene, that sort of digital plotting of a crime scene in an image is better for jurors to see rather than full-blown technical of a murder. Obviously, you don't want to cause your jurors trauma by sharing too much like that.
It's fascinating. It's really, really interesting. That was a really good question there. Jonathan Peace is asking, he's writing a series centered on a WDC, a fictionalized version, it's a good one for UK, in his Yorkshire hometown between 1988 and 2000. This is a big question, but how different were the procedures for investigating murders then compared to now? Particularly for female detectives, but I would actually, Joe, I'm just going to jump in there and say, recommend you get this book, Jonathan, Murder Under the Microscope, because it covers that time period and all sorts of things coming in, the arrival of homes and the homes system and all sorts of things. Kate, how have things changed a lot in the last 20 years?
First of all, can I just say I'm not that old?
No. I mean, because you would have just been starting, wouldn't you?
Graham is, yeah. Graham is. Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of the general fundamentals of an investigation with regards to preservation would remain the same. And I mean, I always like to share huge kudos to former detectives who, when it comes to opening up cold case reviews now, they've done a sterling job, because if you look at the exhibits that we've got from cold case reviews, and I'm sure Graham will agree with that, you've had detectives who've got the foresight to retain and recover evidence types which before they even knew DNA was going to be a thing. So I think sometimes the principles remain with regards to the investigation. What I'd say is obviously the biggest thing between then and now is DNA, because a lot more scene preservation and avoidance of contamination has come in with DNA. DNA profiling, we're currently on DNA 17, which is a completely thoroughly sensitive DNA profiling technique. I think a little bit too good, if you like, because you can get other profiles from samples, which is why contamination is so huge, and we have a real thing of avoiding nothing goes wrong on that. So I'd say the biggest thing for me would be DNA. Other than that, and Graham, correct me if I'm wrong, you usually do, I think the general fundamentals of an investigation are pretty much the same, aren't they?
Yeah, no, they are. And just to illustrate that point, bit of self-promotion here, but Babes in the Wood,
yeah, perfect.
Which is a story of a double jeopardy murder investigation of two children that were killed in 1986 in Brighton. The offender was acquitted, went to prison for something else, and then was convicted in 2018. That illustrates exactly the point that Kate's making there, is that there was no DNA was only just being kind of experimented in Leicestershire on the Colin Pitchfork murders as something that's possibly an investigative technique. But the forensic recovery and the retrieval, recovery and preservation of all of the samples back in 1986, the police in 2017, 2018, to bring a DNA-led investigation, DNA-led prosecution to court. So that principle about that Kate was talking about is illustrated in a live case. I think the other point I would make is around culture. Yeah, I mean the Home Office Large Major Inquiry System, which is the database that kind of investigators use to manage investigations, was just coming in 1988. But I think culture, because we're talking about a female detective in Yorkshire there, and I joined the CID in 1990, and the change in the way that women were the profile within CID and the kind of roles that they were given and the way they were treated, frankly, changed massively in those 12 years that we're talking about in the question. But to the point, and obviously went on. I mean, when I left, I think most of my DIs at Brighton were women. Certainly, the vast majority of the detective sergeants were women. And it was a long time coming, to be honest. So there's a lot of cultural things in there, and also there was a lot of change in accountability of investigations as well between that period. So fascinating period to write between, because you can tell a really rich story about the progression of the police, but dotted into your drama. Your drama can really influence that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I'm going to go for some quick fire questions here that with really short answers, I hope, just to get through a few of them, because there's loads here. And we're, as I say, we're going to go through the questions afterwards, guys. I'm just conscious of the time, just to say to you too, Kate has to go to work, so we have to we'll be losing her at 1 o'clock, but we can roll on a little bit after that. So quick fire questions. Somebody was asking earlier, Graham, whether the police or the, as I say, fire department, that sounds very American, doesn't it, investigate fires. Does that depend on what the outcome of the fire was?
Well, the police will investigate any arsons, but they do it in conjunction with the fire service, and Kate will work with forensic science investigators and specialist fire investigators. So the fire service are fabulous. Well, first of all, they're fabulous at destroying scenes, because they chuck water all over and chuck things out the window. But they're also, they're brilliant and highly qualified, and provide evidence on sources of fire, the timelines of fire. If there's 2 seats of fire, which one's like to start first. So it's a joint investigation of the scene. The actual who did it is falls to the police.
Yeah, Kate, anything to add to that?
I must say, can I just jump in there?
Yeah,
I do like working at arsons. I do love an arson scene. The fire investigators who we work with are so knowledgeable, and we're pretty much led by them, and they can bring in the accelerant dog as well, who will indicate whether accelerant's been used. One thing I've noticed over the years, we're working with fire investigators, is that they always have fantastic brew facilities, which is a highlight. And secondly, their version of, if we go in a building, their version of what a safe building is and my version of what a safe building is are completely different. And bearing in mind, I am one of the clumsiest people I know. That's the only thing I don't like about them, is you walk in a building and you have to walk upstairs where there's no banister rail, and it can be quite hairy at times.
Good question. Somebody else is asking whether there is a book. I think I know the answer to this. Whether there is a book that highlights the difference between American crime scene procedure and UK crime procedure. I would say no, Graham. Perhaps that's one you need to write. Have you found one?
And the thing, obviously, with the States is that every state has a different system, different processes. So probably the answer
further complicate things.
It does. There's a very good Facebook group called Koomson Writers, which is predominantly based in the US, where people are asking these questions all the time about, in this state, how does this work? In that state, how does that work? So Koomson Writers on Facebook is probably your best resource to try and get the difference between the two jurisdictions.
You can see the numbers for that Facebook group just shooting up right now, can't you?
There's loads of resources. Actually, another question is here: what online resources are available to crime writers? And honestly, everything is out there pretty much. It's how you interpret it. I literally am looking at a screen that has four tabs open about skull fractures right now. So I think Graham's website is a great place if you need to ask the question. But if you're interested in research, then there are scientific papers out there. There is Facebook groups. Graham, any top level things that you can think of that would be handy for people straight off? Obviously your website, which we're going to put a link to in a minute.
And I think, there are some great books out there. There are some people that are able to give you loads of advice, and a bit of judicious Google searching will find you most things. What you won't get is you won't get the kind of the nuance that you might need for your book.
Big time.
You won't get the how it works. I've been advising a couple of authors actually that are writing in the West Country of England, Devon and Cornwall and Dorset, and I've had to go to contacts that I've got in those areas. How does it actually work in Exeter? How does it actually work in Dorchester? So you're unlikely to get that. It goes to the point really about the procedure is one thing, but there's often a way around it, and you sometimes, if I know the way around things quite often, and Kate will, and Emma will know the way around things, and it's me just suggesting a line of dialogue or a change in role that will take your story from being incredible to credible, and I mean incredible in a negative.
Which is exactly what you did with William, with the William Shaw changing the firearm to a knife.
William's books are always amazing when I see them anyway, so it's only
awesome. What's really interesting now, just to highlight for you guys watching, is something that is very striking to me, is mindset. And that one of the things you can, I think, probably only get from the experts, which is when coming to talk to you guys makes a difference, is the way you look at things and the way you look at problems. So obviously I'm married to a police officer. I've been out with him an awful lot, and his view on the world is different to mine. In the same way, with Graham and Kate and I met at a festival in Morecambe, and they'd only been there, these two had only been there 5 minutes, and there was a fight in the pub they were in, and so Graham's assessment of that situation was fairly rapid, and they both departed very quickly because it obviously wasn't your area. But it just shows you, I think it's a really good illustration.
No chance. And Kate was quite happy to stay there, but I wasn't so brave.
I'm still upset about the fact I had to leave a full glass of wine. If it was up to me, we would just have stayed and watched it. Probably even joined in.
This is 2.5 years ago, and Kate is still worried about that glass of wine.
Glass of wine.
But I just think you owe her a glass of wine, Graham.
It's
yeah, well said, Emma, well said.
It's very, very interesting, and I think one of the key things that you need to get as a writer when you're writing a particular protagonist, whatever their role is within, if they're within the force, is to try and get that, to nail that mindset. And I'm even doing it with Emma. I'm working on I have a forensic psychologist in the book that I'm working on at the moment, and I was emailing her the other day saying, well, look, if you happen to be sitting in this restaurant and happen to be looking out and seeing this, what do you think? What is your first perception of this situation? Because I know it's going to be different to mine. And so getting that first-hand help is really, really useful. Jane Ryan's just asking us here to the panel about historical writing. She's thinking about the 40s and 50s and writing from a time that doesn't necessarily adhere to accuracy, where possible resources weren't available. What's the view on historical accuracy? I'm a person that's all about accuracy. So how do you feel about, is it possible to fudge things slightly, do you think, Graham, or is it better to stick to the real stuff?
I mean, in contemporary crime, there's the ability to fudge things. It's just you've got to know what to fudge and what have. And I think if you're writing in that era, that you've got to think about how many people will actually catch you out if you get it wrong.
Big time. There's a lot of I'm a history buff. I did history. Yeah.
Okay. So, but I would say, research your police structures because police structures change. Yeah. So try and talk about the right forces. Forces, certainly in England and Wales, forces changed massively in 1968, for example, and that they are still changing now to a degree. So know your forces, know roughly who would do what kind of crime, and know what techniques were available. So don't talk about DNA or CCTV.
Yeah, 1940.
That's obvious, but just know what was around about that time. But don't ever let the procedure bog down the story. Let the procedure bolster the story. Let the procedure give it authenticity, but don't get disheartened because you can't find out how many police officers would have attended a scene of a murder at a quarry in 1943,
or 1798. So I'm very conscious we only have Kate for one more minute, and I have just going to throw you a quick question, Kate, and then just give us a super quick answer. Would the pathologist attend the scene, or would the SOCO who deal with the body at the scene regarding the evidence, etc., at the site? So basically, who looks after the body? Is it SOCO or pathologist?
Ultimately, it's always going to be the SOCO. It's preferable if we can get the pathologist to attend the scene, but we would normally have taken samples from the deceased beforehand. So we would have done swabs, tape lists, that sort of thing. It's ideal if we can get the pathologist there. It gives them a good idea. You get so much information when you're in a crime scene, the feel of the place and the nature of the property, all that sort of stuff. So ideally, you want them there as well to come in and make an assessment of any injuries. Worst case scenario, if we can't get the pathologist there, because as I say, it's not unusual in Manchester, we might have a couple of murders run in, and pathologists cover quite a wide geographical area as well, so they might not be available. We will always make sure that they have a copy of the scene images prior to the post-mortem, so they've got an idea. But regarding taking samples actually at the scene, that's usually always done by us, and then the pathologist will get there samples, obviously in the mortuary, which actually leads me on nicely to something. I did want the opportunity, if I can, to plug another book. If you're interested in finding out more of what goes on behind the mortuary, inside the mortuary even, can you see that okay?
Oh, excellent. Who's
It's
that by? So, Postmortems.
Pastmortems by
Pastmortems.
Carla Valentine.
Excellent.
She's absolutely amazing. I love this book. I laughed all the way through this book. It resonated so much for me. It's nice to read somebody who's got completely sick mind and the same sense of humor as I have. It honestly resonated so much. Carla Valentine is also on Twitter. Do follow her because she has podcasts as well. She's absolutely amazing. But as I say, if you want to know what goes on in the mortuary, then please read this book. It's not for the faint-hearted. It does give quite a lot of detail, but I can thoroughly recommend it.
That is a brilliant tip. Thank you so much. Now, I know you have to shoot off and go to work, but if you get a chance to get back later, the questions are going to be here. So do dip in and have a little look. Thank you very, very much indeed, Kate. And
thank you for having me.
I think we might be back again to talk some more, but we will.
I hope so. I'd be more than happy to. So, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Have
We'll
a
say
good
goodbye
weekend.
now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Kate.
The rest of us are going to stay with you. There's Kate. There we go. And for the rest of us, we look like we're squished into a sandwich. Sorry, Graham, you're in the middle there. We've got a few more questions to go through, and then I want to just talk about the crime scene workshop that you're going to be doing next weekend, Graham, because I think that's going to be very useful for people. I'm just looking through the questions here.
I've picked out a couple of very short questions for Vanessa that I can answer while you're there.
It was a good start of the question. Go on.
Yeah, Sharon Payne asked about retrograde amnesia. Would having retrograde amnesia prevent somebody getting DBS approval to work with children? I'm guessing DBS is like kind of social services or Garda approval. It depends. Again, the old typical psychology answer is it depends on, retrograde amnesia, for those that don't know, is amnesia or memory loss about an event that, kind of before, leading up to the event. So you can have amnesia before an event, of an event, and after an event. So it depends on the severity, I guess, of the retrograde amnesia. Can they not remember anything? So if somebody, say, is a trained social care worker and they have retrograde amnesia, do they remember any of their training? Well, then that would prevent them from. But if it's just retrograde amnesia about the actual event that caused the amnesia, then it probably wouldn't. So it depends. Okay. Very short.
And just to cut in, Graham, we lost your sound there for a second. I think you were telling us what the DBS was.
Oh, I was just saying, DBS is the Disclosure and Barring Service, which is the vetting service in England and Wales.
Yeah.
But presumably, if somebody has something traumatic happened in their past, that might be influence Graham, you probably know more about this, whether or not they'd even be passed for muster in first instance. Yeah,
the DBS wouldn't pick up on that. It picks up on criminal convictions and intelligence. Health related should be picked up through an occupational health questionnaire that the employer decides to give, but I don't think it would necessarily bar somebody in the same way as the DBS would.
Mm-hmm. And just on that, those kind of Garda disclosures or DBS, it doesn't mean that somebody is safe. It just means they haven't been caught or they haven't done anything. So and one other very quick question is something Gaffney asked: do stalkers tend to suffer from mental illness? Again,
one for you.
It depends. I would hazard a guess that they may not be suffering with a mental illness per se, but there may be some personality disorders or some disrupted attachment disorders going on there.
Trauma.
Much more likely to come from a trauma and attachment related difficulties than a mental illness per se. Excellent. So they're just two very quick ones that I've happened to catch as I was scrolling through. So
excellent. Marie has jumped in and answered Kat Walker's question about arson, which is great. Fire officers, that's great. We've also got another forensic psychologist on the call who does something similar to you, Emma, in terms of prisons. And let's see what else have we got. There's the retrograde amnesia question.
Just on that, she mentioned the forensic psychologist. I'm not sure who she is. S. Rose, I think her name was. Mentioned about writing parole reports and evaluation as people come into jail, and then parole reports for people who are considered, who are eligible to be considered for parole. One crime does not always predict future dangerousness. You have to look at that whole kind of spectrum of what were the risk factors that led up to the crime. in the same way, when you're writing crime, you know, just because somebody has had a relationship breakdown does not mean that they are automatically future danger. You know, will be dangerous in the future moving forward.
Yeah, interesting. It's great stuff. There's some more good questions here. This is an Ireland question, but I think it applies across the UK as well. Would it be possible for a former Garda police officer to work on cold cases and help his former colleagues out in this way? I'm thinking about a person trying to solve a case after he retired, and how would the Garda deal with him in relation to this case? So is this, presumably this is a protagonist who is out of the job and needs to use his colleagues' resources. Graham, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, I'm sure it's the same in the Garda as well as in the police. Retired officers are regularly employed as investigators because they've got, you know, huge amounts of expertise and experience, and are generally quite young when they retire, so they've still got work.
Very.
So certain, you know, in England and Wales, there are cold case units in just about force, staffed by retired officers. So it would be completely credible for a retired officer who has a particular knowledge, a particular interest in a case, to either be employed on a casual, not on a casual basis, but on a short-term basis. So through some, you know, agency that happens, to go work in the force to work on that investigation. And why wouldn't you? You know, if you've got somebody that's got that knowledge in their head. So I think that's a perfectly credible profile to have of your protagonist, if that's what it is.
Yeah, I think you've just set up a really interesting whole scenario there in terms of protagonists, Graham, the whole cold case idea, isn't it? And people who retired from the job. So there's another question here. Where did it go? About first responders to a crime scene. I see a lot of confusion about what police officers do when they respond to a call and find a deceased person, especially in relation to pronouncing death and calling a forensic pathologist. Can you quickly run through the process? So a whistle-stop tour of what happens when you find a dead body, Graham.
Okay, so generally the first people that will be called will be normal uniformed police officers will get called because something will have been reported. They would go find the person dead. They would then the first thing they would do is have to check for signs of life, because their primary role is to preserve life. So, you know, all the forensic stuff goes out the window for those moments that they're trying to preserve them. If that doesn't happen, then if they're not absolutely sure, then they would call a paramedic to declare life extinct. If it's absolutely clear that they wouldn't have to, then I think things have changed. Kate mentioned that you'd need to call a paramedic. That things have recently changed on that, so you wouldn't need to do that.
Actually, sorry, just to interrupt you, it's very interesting, because it used to be that you actually needed a doctor on the scene to actually declare life extinct, even if it was very clearly the person was dead.
That's changed now because doctors basically
practical.
Yeah, absolutely, and paramedics.
I'm not sure that that's changed over here, though. I know certainly within some investigations that I've been kind of privy to, not involved in, but privy to, that it has had to be a GP or medical.
Well, Marie can jump in there because she's on the call, so she might be able to comment on that. Sorry, Graham, keep going.
And I was advising an author on that last weekend, so as I do with all my advice, I checked to make sure I was current, and that's certainly the case. So the scene would be secured. Detectives would be called. You know, we've got a dead body, believe we've got a murder here. That they would come down, confirm, yes, this is a suspicious death, and Marie's made the point in the chat somewhere that a suspicious death is treated as a suspicious death until the contrary is proven. So even if they're not sure, treat as suspicious death, and then scenes of crime officers would be called to start examining the scene. As Kate said, the pathologist wouldn't always go to the scene. They might do. Particularly if they and the senior investigating officer thought that there might be a value in them being there and seeing the body in situ. But the body's going to be photographed, videoed from every angle, samples taken, etc. So quite often pathologists don't need to go to the scene, but they can do. But after the scene, the scenes of crime officers have been there, it'll probably be a couple of hours at the very least before.
And one of the things I see a lot of actually is the scenes not being controlled. So I think one of the key things, again, for people to remember is that there is literally a procedure in here. There's a system. Everybody knows what it is, and certainly in Ireland, the scene is controlled. Well, probably get this wrong now, but Maria will be able to tell us, I think it's the first officer on the scene. They create the scene log, and they're logging everybody who's coming in and out of that scene, so that that, again, reducing that risk of contamination, you know exactly who's been there. And that's really important. Graham, just on the point of suicide, if you arrive at a suicide, is that considered to be a suspicious, a supposed suicide? You don't know at that point. Is it assumed to be a suspicious death from the get-go, or how do you go with that?
Principle, you know, if you treat it as suspicious until otherwise, but you'd have to investigate the suicide for the coroner, even if it wasn't a criminal investigation. So you know, police in England and Wales have responsibility to investigate on behalf of the coroner. So it wouldn't be quite the same. You know, there's obviously a suicide. So, you know, you've got someone hanging there and a suicide note that's clearly written in their hand, and there's nothing to indicate anything else. Then, you know, there are certain sort of scene preservation and information, evidence gathering that you would do at the time, but you wouldn't, you know, if you were happy that it wasn't a suspicious death, you wouldn't then sort of go through all the whistles and bells that you would for a murder.
Okay, interesting. Somebody's asking here about, is it possible for you to look over their novel for accuracy of the character? And the question is absolutely yes, which is probably a good moment for us to bring in. I'm just going to see if I can find that awful picture of you, Graham, for a second. Back again. Sorry to make you cringe, I know. I should tell you what I'm going to do first is I'm going to bring in Graham's book, because he mentioned that briefly earlier, but that's a link to Babes in the Woods. So anybody who needs to look back on past procedure, that's a good one there. And then we're getting rid of that. This is sorry, what happened then? Try that again. This is the crime scene weekend that Graham is going to be doing next weekend. Is it next weekend?
Next weekend. Yeah. So that's that starts on the Friday evening, goes through to the Sunday evening. It's called Solving a Murder: The First 48 Hours, and the course starts off with a call to the police, an officer being dispatched, and then you're taken to a crime scene, virtually, obviously. You're taken to a crime scene where something has happened. There's video footage. There's photographic stills. It's not a real crime scene. It's my son playing a very good dead body.
He adds hastily.
And then weekend, you're drip fed information in real time that you would get. So you're not going to be getting the post-mortem results within an hour. You know, you're not going to be identifying your suspect, but you write the story. So you write from that crime scene. You write the story, and what we do is we tell you the sorts of things that you would get at particular times. We've got input from Peter James, Mark Billingham, Elly Griffiths, and a few others. There's web chats. There's a briefing that, as it would happen between Kate and I, you know, at the scene. So we've staged that. But
sounds absolutely awesome.
You write stories. So, and I've never, this will be the third time we've run it. I've never seen two similar stories arising from the same crime scene. So the creativity is amazing, and it goes on, and you end up writing a 1,500-word piece at the end of it, which then I will critique. So if next weekend, if you've got nothing on, then you know, please
sign up for that.
I think the link's in the chat.
I think it's gone into the chat. Yeah, it's gone into the comments, probably twice actually, given that the thing came up twice. No, absolutely gold dust, that is. And if people can't make it next weekend, then this is something you're going to be running again. But that type of I think sort of support and experience that you're bringing to that is just incredible. So I mean, that's
also you know, Kate, I mean, through me, but Kate, Emma, I, and you know, all the other experts will review your manuscripts for you. We'll answer questions that you've got around your manuscripts. It's not just about police procedurals. Most of the people I deal with are writing psychological thrillers with elements of crime or bits of policing in it, and they, you know, they'll work with me on those bits. So
okay, and yes, that's at the weekend. That gives us a perfect opportunity to bring in this gorgeous picture of you on the news. You hate that, don't you?
What am I doing there? What am I chewing? I'm chewing.
You're talking to somebody. Actually, I had to cut them out. So It looks like you're on Crime Watch or something. I'm not too sure whose news it is because your head's in the way, but it's definitely a news program. So that is a link then to Graham's website, to the experts that are available to you through him, and the services that he offers to writers. Emma is obviously one of his team. So is Kate, Marie, who is on the chat as well, who is on the Garda end, and there's more Garda people coming in as we percolate this message out across Ireland.
We've got Scotland covered as well now.
And Scotland covered as well, where things are slightly different there too. So it's really interesting just to get that experience and have it on hand. So anything you need doing. Now, Graham, just tell us a little bit about the offer that you're doing for people today. We actually have something very special, don't we?
You might, yeah. So I will critique manuscripts. As I say, I'll do whole manuscripts or part manuscripts. But just for people that are on this chat, the first 25 people that send me up to 500 words of crime or policing from their book, I will review that and critique that for free. So if you send that to me we're using the contact at policeadvisor.co.uk. Then
the email's gone out with that too.
The email's gone out for that. Brilliant. Then I will first 25. I will send that back to you free of charge. So, but only 500 words. I'm not. I can't.
Yeah, it's not a machine. It's got a job as well. Yeah, 500, literally 500 words, and this is like one of those competitions where if it's over 500 words, he's not going to do it. Okay, so try and distill it right down if you can, and that'll just be the first 25 submissions. But obviously, he's available long term on for bigger projects and for more detailed pieces where you might have a particular scene that you want you to read over, Graham, and you know, if you triage everything, don't you? So you'll know who to ask.
That's right. Yeah.
Or whatever.
Right, expert. And so I know we're way over time here, but just to say that we've, you know, this has been a brilliant session, but and we are going to go through the questions, but I'm doing a similar session on Friday at the UK Crime Book Club, which, you know, if you haven't had your question answered or you've thought of others you've not been able to get through, then join us at 7 o'clock on the UK Crime Book Club.
So there's another one there. So, and Noelle Holton's just saying that she's been reading things where probation officers, all sorts of things have happened, and that jerks her out of the story. And that's, I think, a really, really good point, because when you are writing a book as an author, you don't know who's going to pick it up, and they might be a pathologist, they might be a forensic psychologist, they could be an ex-police officer, and you want the story to be as real for them as it would be for somebody who knows nothing about the crime. So I think, to me, accuracy is absolutely important, is vital. Somebody here, I'm going to keep going, I think, just for a little while longer. I know we are over time, but there's so many interesting questions. Somebody here, how do cold cases get opened again? I'm writing a YA murder mystery and we'll have a present day I'll try that again. I have a present day 13-year-old investigating the death of a person in 1969. I think this could be a challenge. Wondering how the police would respond to new evidence. Graham, why are cold cases reopened?
So most cold cases are reviewed on an annual basis anyway, because primarily around the forensic opportunities, because the science is changing so much. But some cases are also reviewed because there's a thought that maybe a witness who didn't come forward before, or someone whose loyalty's changed, might now be prepared to talk to the police. In that situation, if the 13-year-old, I'm fascinated about that story. I think that's really really innovative. But that if the 13-year-old came forward to the police with credible evidence to say that, you know, this case, you know, I found this and I found that, then the police would review the case, see how the evidence fitted in with what they already knew. It might have been old evidence that's already been discounted, but it probably won't be, otherwise you won't have a book out of it. And they would open it, you know, not precious about where the evidence comes from, and providing it something that can help. Police would definitely progress that on the basis of that.
Excellent, really interesting. Some great questions here. There's just one here. Then again, this is a tricky one. I think this is to do with the point of view. My answer would be point of view on this one. It says, how can you tell the difference between a suicide, drowning, and a person being pushed? My novel's not a crime story, but a crime is committed, and the inquest reports suicide. Is this believable? I think that could be a tricky one. Any thoughts on that one, Graham?
Yeah, no, it could be a tricky one, and you know, it would depend on the circumstances leading up to the person hitting the water, I suppose, more forensic side of it themselves. I mean, obviously, if there was evidence of a fight or something like that, then that might point more towards murder. If the person had been depressed and made previous suicide attempts, that might point towards suicide. There's certainly a lot you can do forensically to determine whether a person was dead before they went in the water or whether they drowned. But the actual how they ended up in the water would be around the circumstances and the evidence and the information that surrounded that event, rather than forensically being able to prove that they were pushed or jumped in, unless they got hand mark bruises on
the back. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think you'd look at all sorts of things there, wouldn't you? Things like if they've booked a hairdressing appointment for Friday and this all happened on the previous Monday, intent would be
you, from a psychological point of view, you would look at the person's, as you said correctly, Vanessa, plans for the future, but also how they've been in the kind of run up to that. As Graham pointed out, has there been previous suicide attempts, self-harming behaviors, that kind of stuff? Have they was it a cry out for help if they tried something like this in the past? Or, is this person, very obviously making plans for the future, and then all of a sudden it's like, why? And that's not to say that people don't have plans for the future and complete suicide. That can happen too.
Yeah. So you've got but not a challenge, but just something that's in terms of the novel and delivering if it isn't a suicide and it is somebody who was pushed, then working out how you deliver the evidence for that. And actually nailing it down could be down to a witness, and that could be down to a point of view situation. So because obviously your key protagonist is at this point dead and cannot report on what happened. So that's a really interesting question. We do set ourselves up the most difficult and tricky situations, don't we? We have to try and execute when you come up with a plan and you're like, and you work it. I always work back from the crime to see how it would have happened. There's loads of questions coming in there. Somebody else isn't writing crime, writing women's fiction, but a crime is committed in my story. I've ended up doing so much research on crime writing just so I can fit this one element into the story. This is so true. This is where Graham really can help out, and his experts can help out. If you're touching on something and you don't want to spend 3 days resolving it, literally I was doing skull fractures for 3 or 4 hours the other day. You absolutely fire something over to him and he can say to you, well, look, this is what would happen, or these are the things you need to think about, and can come up with solutions as well. That the experience that these guys have got, 20 years experience in their various fields, will save you so many hours of Googling. And the other thing, sorry, I just have to add in here quickly about Google, is when you're checking things, absolutely try 2 or 3 sources, because Wikipedia is notoriously incorrect. And when I was doing my skull fractures the other day, I was looking at images of skull fractures, and somebody had a very helpful image that was suggesting the different areas of the head and the names of them. And I went to another image, and two of them were reversed. So if I'd have started off with the first image, I would have made a horrendous mess. And, you need to check 2 or 3 sources each time to try and make sure that you've got the right information, because interpretation of data and interpretation of scientific evidence is there for a reason, for the person who's writing the paper or whatever, and you want to make sure that it works for you and your scenario. So we've got some great stuff in there. What have I missed, Graham? Have I got any more of your, and there's no more links to put out. I think we've got most of them. We've got your book, we've got Kate's book, we've got the links to your website now have gone out with your email address. You will do the first 25.
Someone did ask what the email, just say it again, contact at policeadvisor, and policeadvisor with an or.co. And that will get.
I think I've actually put your Graham Bartlett one out. You're not going to.
That's fine. They both get to me. So Graham.Bartlett is fine as well. Can I just say, sorry, I just didn't mean to interrupt. Marie, thank you so much. I'm just looking at the chat. You've been absolutely
brilliant, isn't it?
Up on some of the points that have come up there. You've been amazing. Thank you.
She's really good. Marie's a serving officer and has all sorts of experience in different areas of the Gardaí, and she helps a lot of us crime authors here in Ireland because she's in the location, on the button, as they say, and she's put in lots of answers and different bits and pieces there, but scene preservation and all sorts of things. And she is there. She's part of your panel, as I said before, Graham. So if anybody who is coming from Ireland and needs Irish input, then you're able to call on her and other people. And obviously Emma's on the scene here in Dublin too. So that's been an absolutely fantastic, now nearly hour and a half. We could go on forever.
There are questions that are still, there are questions that are still unanswered, but we will get to them.
Guys, going to go through and get your answers a bit later through the course of the day. So do check back. This has been recorded, so everybody can watch it back on the writing.ie Facebook page. It's also on YouTube, and we'll be sharing it through Twitter and various other places if you've missed it. Do ask your questions. Please ask the questions. Don't make the mistake. One of the big things about writing crime is that if you make a mistake early on, or you assume something, it can really cause an awful lot of havoc, and you can end up having to rewrite a plot, and just the amount of hours in that is just mind-blowing. So make sure that you do check in with these guys, check in with Graham, just to say, obviously there is a fee for his service too, because his guys need to be paid. So there are fees involved, but it's all very clear on his site, and he can give you quotes. He does full manuscript reviews. He does synopsis reviews. He does the whole lot. So whatever it is that you need, tell him what your problem is, and then he can tell you what solutions he has and how much it might cost, because obviously people have to feed their children as well. So thank you very much indeed, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Everybody asking brilliant questions. As I say, we're going to get to those questions later. We will tune out now because these guys need to have their lunch, and I think we've got everything in there. So thank you very, very much indeed for joining me. I'm just going to pop out this and pop in this, just for anybody who wants to buy my book as well. That's out now at the moment, the Dark Room. And we look forward to seeing you again soon, because I have a feeling we might be doing this again. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
We don't get to them today because Kate's working. Them some might be, by the end of the weekend they'll all be answered.
Definitely. So keep checking back, and the guys will be using their own Facebook pages to reply, so that you can spot them, and then you can follow them, and all the tagging things will work. So fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, guys.
Great.